The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar session, 6 Things to Do Before You Launch Your Service Catalog Implementation Project. My name is Trip Solomon. I am a manager of professional services at PMG. I've been with PMG for almost 12 years, and I've overseen successful implementations of PMG's Service Catalog solution for numerous clients over the years. I'm involved with client implementation projects from inception all the way through to delivery, and when I'm working on those projects, I'm obviously working closely with my clients to help them solve real business problems. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes. You can ask questions via the chat window there in the GoToWebinar window. We'll try to take some questions at the end of the session. The session is scheduled for 30 minutes, and we're going to try to stick to that as closely as we can. But just rest assured, if we don't get to your questions during the session, someone will definitely follow up with you directly as quickly as we can. And a copy of this presentation deck and a recording of the actual webinar event itself will be provided by PMG after the event. All right, just a quick note about the service catalog concept in general. Here at PMG, we really view our product as more than just an IT tool. We really see it as an enterprise service platform. We think about it as an enabling technology that really can be used across your entire organization, serving as that single pane of glass for all of your users and all of the service offerings that they have available to them. So we'd encourage you to try to keep that perspective in mind during your project planning and preparation work. So don't limit yourself to necessarily one functional area or another. All right, so here's the agenda for today's session. These are the 6 high-level steps that we're going to talk about today, the things you want to do before you launch your service catalog implementation initiative. Some of this is going to seem pretty obvious or just common sense, but it's all important enough to really merit stressing and repeating. These are really going to be the steps that help you build a solid foundation for success. Now, the sequence of these steps is are not absolute, and some of the steps could potentially be done in parallel, but the outcome of one step often influences some of the others, so we'd encourage you to consider them in this order when possible. All right, so step number 1, identify your key stakeholders. So who are the main players in your service catalog implementation project? You really want to know who these key project stakeholders are from a business perspective. These are going to be the folks who have the big picture in mind. They are the people with a vested interest in the success of your service catalog implementation, and hopefully they're the people that are going to help you drive the project from inception through to completion. They're going to vary from company to company, but they typically include people like the executive sponsors, maybe the folks who've authorized this initiative financially. They're also going to include functional leaders, business unit directors, or department heads, people who stand to benefit from the initiative, as well as the service delivery owners. These will be the people who will be directly impacted by the initiative. Their day-to-day activities and processes are going to be affected by this rollout. So they're all going to have their own unique perspective and different expectations. So obviously you're going to want to understand in advance what you're looking to achieve with this implementation project. So taking your key stakeholders in mind, you want to work with them to understand what their specific expectations are and how are they going to really determine the level of success with the project. So you want to work towards some key success metrics. Obviously those metrics are going to allow you to measure your degree of success against the underlying business drivers. So, for example, a success metric might be to decrease overall service delivery or SLA times by 50%, or maybe calculated customer satisfaction levels improved by 25%, or maybe even something more specific like increasing the number of password resets that get handled per help desk resource each month by 75%. On the other hand, something kind of generic like we need to reduce the amount of complaints heard around the water cooler is really just too intangible to measure, so you want to avoid those types of things. Obviously, there's always going to be high-level business goals for an initiative like this, such as improving efficiency or eliminating redundancies. But having some tangible, quantifiable target metrics can really be valuable to help you gauge your level of success. All right, then lastly, within the topic of identifying your key stakeholders, you want to look for a service catalog champion if you can. The service catalog champion is someone who's going to be visible to the business, who's an enthusiastic supporter of the initiative. This is someone who could potentially represent the whole project team at the executive level. It's someone who ideally truly understands the potential value and ROI of this initiative. It's someone that could help you break through roadblocks and help avoid delays along the way. Ideally, this could be someone with the authority to push through approvals or maybe even expedite internal processes. For example, maybe they could help you speed up the process of procuring new hardware for the project, or they can help you assure that the right personnel get assigned to the project team. On the flip side, you're also going to want to identify any key stakeholders who potentially hold an opposing view. I'd like to refer to these people as your anti-champion. This could be someone who's skeptical of the initiative in general, or maybe someone who's a little overly protective of their current processes or their role. Maybe they're not a fan of the selective service catalog product. People have their own opinions and are naturally resistant to change. So, ideally you won't run into this person, but frankly, it's not that uncommon. So if you run into someone like this, it's important that you understand their viewpoint and hear their specific concerns. You want to make that extra effort to bring them into the fold and really make them feel like their concerns are being addressed directly. It's important to win them over in the long run too, so don't shy away from them, hear them out, and try to address their concerns directly. And keep in mind that a converted skeptic can become a powerful advocate in the long run. All right, next, step 2, understand your business drivers. So why are we doing this? What is really driving the implementation of a service catalog from a business perspective? One answer that's not sufficient would be something like, because someone told me to deploy a service catalog. I've actually heard that one a few times before. You really want to start looking for what are the high-level objectives and what's our strategy to realize them? How will a service catalog meet those goals and help us deliver on that strategy? This overall business driver context is really important to the decision-making processes that you'll go through during the course of your implementation project. Otherwise, without that business driver context, you're going to be faced with design decisions or functionality options along the way, and you'll have to effectively be choosing things in a vacuum. So you want to have that big picture. So you want to start documenting your overall business drivers at this high level, and a good place to start is by creating a project charter. A project charter is a document that helps define the overall initiative in business terms. It's not an absolute requisite, but from our experience, projects tend to run more smoothly and be more successful with a charter like this in place. In fact, this is typically one of the first deliverables that PMG would help produce as part of a service catalog implementation engagement. Obviously, it's going to include high-level directives and guiding principles, maybe something like a mission statement, for example. But it also needs to include some more granular details about the project and all the relevant requirements. So, for example, you're going to want to include high-level objectives, high-level scope, what's in and out of scope for this effort. Things like roles and responsibilities, who are all the team members that are going to be working on the project, and what are their particular roles. Any relevant assumptions about the work effort that you might want to consider. If you can, start working towards some target timelines even, and then maybe with a few more details, list out specific deliverables or milestones that you want to meet along the way. And then also to include any risks. Risks are obviously important for all the key stakeholders and the entire project team to clearly identify and understand along the way so that they can be mitigated. So a project charter is not necessarily something that must or really can't even be finalized before you launch your implementation initiative, but it's important to start thinking about and documenting these elements in advance. So to kind of summarize the charter concept, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Creating a project charter is not always fun. Driving consensus across a wide group of folks like this can be difficult, but it's really worth the effort in the long run, because when questions or issues or risks arise, which they inevitably will during the project, the whole project team has a single document that they can refer back to for guidance. All right, so you've begun at a high level with a project charter, but now you want to start drilling down into some more specifics. You want to start thinking about individual business drivers and the related challenges for those drivers, and then a strategy for addressing them through a service catalog platform. So I've got a couple of client examples that I want to use to illustrate how you can identify those drivers and tie a strategy directly to them. So in one case, working with a big telecom ISP company, they had a number of challenges that they were facing. They had some IT-oriented service offerings that really involved multiple people and multiple teams across their IT department in order to fulfill requests. Often those teams were working in different systems as well. Their end users or customers had to string these different processes together somewhat manually. They basically had to know who to talk to and how to engage them for each of the steps along the way to get what they needed. But as you can imagine, customers really are only concerned with the end result. In this case, it was related specifically to infrastructure management. They just knew that they needed to get a new virtual server spun up, or maybe they needed to turn on or off a load balancer. They didn't really need to know all the steps behind the scenes that were required to make that happen. IT was spending a lot of time processing these requests, and obviously IT costs increased as the business grew. So some clear business objectives or drivers emerged from here. They definitely wanted to improve IT service delivery time significantly. And another driver was to reduce overall IT costs by some percentage, 20% or so in this case. So the strategy that they assigned to this driver in this case was to improve infrastructure management by consolidating these types of service offerings into a service catalog platform that was aimed directly at the business users, that would provide them with that single interface for a real end-to-end service delivery experience and shielding their customers from all the detailed steps on the fulfillment side. The second part of their strategy was to leverage service catalog integration capabilities in order to automate certain types of infrastructure provisioning and ongoing management activities. All right, one more example, a multinational food processing company. They had some challenges they were facing as well, and in this case, they had some existing R&D processes that were predominantly manual and with no real single centralized data repository for reporting. Again, as often is seen, there were functional groups working effectively in silos, which gave management very limited visibility across all these groups. These factors combined to make it really difficult to forecast demand. Materials and ingredients were either being under-ordered or over-ordered, worst case, and in those cases, oftentimes ingredients were being wasted. And on top of that, resource scheduling was complicated as well. And by resources, I mean both the machinery that might need to run in order to run these testing processes, or even the actual personnel that needed to operate them, whether that's to prep the equipment, operate the equipment, or clean up after it, for example. So in this case, their business objective or their business driver was to improve that demand forecasting for their materials and resources. And the strategy that they employed in this case was to really automate and govern the entire product lifecycle processes. By standardizing the interface and processes through which that R&D service request was fulfilled, and consolidating those request processes into a single system where all the relevant product and supporting resource data was readily visible and reportable. All right, so now we're on to step 3, know your audience. It's important that you identify your primary service catalog users and all your various audience types and understand their business needs. And audiences will typically fall into 3 primary groups, so we'll take a look at those now. The first group would be your customers or your requesters, your end users effectively. It's obviously important for you to know who your customers or requesters are. requesters and end users are the ones that are going to be interacting with the system all the time. User experience and usability are always important for adoption. Adoption is obviously key because if no one's using the system, there's no value to realize and no ROI. So obviously it needs to be easy for them to find what they need and simple for them to submit requests. Okay, the second audience group to consider would be your service delivery teams or your fulfillment teams. Who are the folks that are going to actually deliver these services? These are the people who get assigned tasks within the system to deliver the requested services coming in from your end users. The Service Catalog platform needs to make their jobs as easy and efficient as possible as well. If possible, it needs to streamline their work and eliminate redundancies. So you want to understand what their existing processes are now and start to get a feel for how they do their work day to day. Do they prefer separate email notifications on each new task assignment, for example? Or do they prefer to work directly from a queue inbox? Getting this kind of perspective in advance really helps you avoid rework or changes later on in the implementation project. All right, lastly, the third audience type that you want to consider would be your catalog administrators. Catalog admins obviously need to be able to manage and maintain the system. Catalog content, and specifically I'm talking about service request forms and workflow designs, should be easy for them to manage and update. If it's not, then the service offerings are going to get stale or outdated really quickly, and usage and adoption will drop off at that point. So you want to get the catalog admin team identified and involved early on in the actual implementation project where possible. You want to go ahead and get their feedback and input early and help facilitate their adoption all along. All right, so in summary, for understanding or knowing your audience, your Service Catalog platform really needs to relate to all of your target audiences in business terms that they understand. This will drive usage and maximize adoption. All right, step number 4, understand your business processes. All right, so this seems kind of obvious, but it's really difficult to start or certainly finish your implementation project without this. You really need to clearly identify the specific business processes that are most important for deploying into your Service Catalog platform. And then how do those business processes translate into the specific service offerings for your target audiences? So ultimately, you're looking to compile a list of the actual services that will be deployed into your catalog. Frequently, you're going to come up with more than you originally thought you might have. So if that's the case, prioritize them. That way you have the option to address them in the order of priority and potentially roll them out in phases if you need to. So once you have worked to put together a list of the services that will get deployed in the catalog, you want to go ahead and identify the people who manage these processes or own these services for delivery and begin working with them so that you can gain a clear understanding of how they work currently. How is a given service requested right now? How does that service currently get delivered? What are all the steps along the way? Who's involved or responsible for each of those steps on the fulfillment side? And as you start collecting this information, you're going to begin to paint a picture of how all these services work currently, and oftentimes you'll see opportunities for improvement along the way, which is always beneficial. All right, next, you want to start thinking about defining your services. So once you've identified the target service offerings you want to deploy, you need to start thinking about how you can define those services. So eventually, someone's going to need to build these services out into your Service Catalog product. That might be an internal team, that could be your Service Catalog vendor, or some combination of the two. But regardless, whoever's doing the work, they're going to need to know exactly what they're configuring. So your target services really need to be well defined. So at this point, before the implementation project really begins, you don't necessarily need to finish creating all the detailed requirements documentation. That's usually part of the implementation project itself. But what you do want to start thinking about at this point would be the kinds of info you need to gather and document when you get there. You want to work towards consistently and well-defined services. So think about this. It's important to define your service offerings in business terms for the end user audience. Again, as I've mentioned before, users really only care about the end result, not necessarily about the behind-the-scenes steps or details. And on the flip side, a poorly defined service can really undermine usage and really will ultimately undermine the value of your service catalog platform as a whole. So an example of a poorly defined service might be something with a nondescript service name or something that has a description with a bunch of technical jargon in it. Maybe it includes a service request form with generic free-form text fields or minimal instructional text. Perhaps the workflow definition has no conditional logic spelled out, and maybe only just some high-level workflow steps are outlined. That's going to be really difficult to build and difficult to test. So on the other hand, a well-defined service, as you can imagine, really takes the guesswork out of things for your user audience. It helps you gather all the relevant information you need to deliver a service request. It helps you eliminate invalid requests, helps you minimize errors and reduce calls to the help desk for assistance, and it limits resubmissions. So an example of how a service can be well-defined would be something that has a simple, concise service name that's easily recognizable to the customer or end user. It would include a service description that uses business terminology that they're familiar with. It would include request forms that have controlled question types and clear validation rules on those questions. It will also include well thought out categorization, making it really easy for your customers to find what they're looking for. And then your well-defined service will also include a detailed workflow design and various requirements that outline any conditional routing or logic that's going to be involved, as well as any contingency planning or error handling steps that might be needed. All right, step number 5, consider your integration points. So a service catalog platform can really serve to help you integrate a bunch of different systems potentially. It's not a requirement for all service catalog deployments, but if you're able to leverage existing technology investments and serve your end users better, you can really maximize the value and ROI that your service catalog is going to bring. So you want to determine what, if any, existing external systems or tools you might want to integrate with as part of your implementation project. So, for example, things like help desk ticketing systems that might be involved in the fulfillment process. This would be things like Remedy or CA Service Desk or HPSM or ServiceNow. You also want to consider any infrastructure management tools that might be available, for example, VMware, Amazon Cloud, or maybe F5. You also want to consider any possible accounting systems that you might want to integrate with, something like SAP, or authentication systems like Active Directory or LDAP, maybe even collaboration tools like SharePoint. So if you're able to identify any of these potential external systems that you might want to integrate with your service catalog implementation, you want to find out who those system owners are and start working with them early on. You want to get them on board with the effort overall and reassure them that your service catalog implementation is not a threat to their systems or roles, but really just another way to integrate with their mission-critical systems. So you're going to want to solicit their expertise and determine any integration requirements that may be there. While you're doing that, obviously you want to identify any potential challenges or complexity around that integration so that you can get ahead of that early. And again, integration with external systems can be really key because that can allow you to deliver that true end-to-end experience for your customers where everything appears seamless to them. All right, step number 6, choosing the right service catalog product. So there are a number of different service catalog products out there, and they may all excel in different areas. You know, some make it really easy to create and manage service offerings on the front end. Some provide stronger workflow automation capabilities. Some have better integration capabilities, which allow you to tie into those external data sources or systems that we just talked about. Some excel at automated infrastructure management or virtual provisioning, like cloud integration. Others may be better at reporting. So you're definitely going to want to look for features that align with your key business drivers. You know, if reducing demand on IT is a key business driver, then you're going to want to choose a product that enables service owners to create and manage their own service offerings without relying on IT resources. If SLA times are crucial, then you're going to want to select a product that has strong service fulfillment, tracking, and reporting capabilities. Conversely, if your company is moving towards a cloud model, you don't want to select a product that's weak on automated virtual provisioning. You're also going to want to refer back to your target audiences and consider their different perspectives when you're evaluating service catalog features. For example, what does your customer need? How are they going to use the catalog? Versus, say, what do your catalog administrators need and how are they going to work? So Gartner's actually published a critical capabilities report for service catalog tools, and it's a great resource to compare and contrast all the different service catalog features and options that are available out there. The Gartner report also does a great job of illustrating different use cases for the various key audiences. If you're not a Gartner client, you can actually access this report on the PMG website, and I'll show you where to do that in just a second. All right, so as you're about to get started, I have some bonus information here that I'd like to mention. So everything that we've talked about up till now was really just prep work to get you to the starting line. There really are a couple of additional steps I'd suggest that you consider as you get started with your service catalog implementation project. Number one, have a nice on-site kickoff meeting, a face-to-face meeting with all the key stakeholders and your service catalog vendor if possible. This kind of initial in-person meeting is really important to ensure that everyone gets on the same page from the beginning, and it helps establish a personal working relationship for the whole project team and the key stakeholders, and really sets a positive tone for the whole initiative. All right, and then secondly, we would recommend identifying a couple of what we call alpha services and start there. So this would be a few high priority or selected service offerings that you want to build out to completion as step one in your initiative. And there are a couple of different approaches here in this case. One approach would be to pick the simplest service offering or maybe the highest volume service offering and tackle it first. In either case, this would be an opportunity to demonstrate a quick ROI win. Conversely, an alternate approach would be to try to tackle the most complex service offering first. And the thinking here would be to effectively identify the most difficult thing you're going to have to build and knock it out first. You get that out of the way, you may identify any potential pitfalls or common obstacles that you may run into with the other services, and more than likely any components that could be reusable. So personally, I tend to prefer the simpler service first or the higher volume service first approach. I think it tends to generate excitement and foster goodwill that can really come in handy as you face challenges later on. All right, so a quick recap. Here are the 6 steps that we just talked about. Number 1, identify your key stakeholders and find a champion if you can. Number 2, understand your business drivers. What are the business objectives for this initiative and what's the strategy to deliver on them? Number 3, know your audience. Know all of your potential key audience types and their perspectives. Number 4, understand your business processes. Clearly identify the service offerings that you want to deploy in your service catalog and begin thinking about how you're going to define those services so that they can be easily deployed. Number 5, consider any integration points that might help you integrate with external systems and really deliver that true end-to-end service request experience for your customers or end users. And number 6, of course, choose the right service catalog product that aligns with all of these points. As I mentioned, if you are not a Gartner client, you can access a copy of that report here on the PMG website under the Products tab. You can see it right there. And looking to see now if we have time for any questions. It looks like we may have a minute or two, so let's try to take a couple of questions. And again, just be aware that if we don't get to your question here, we will definitely get back to you as soon as we can individually. So question number one, how do you know which service offerings are good candidates for deploying in your catalog? Well, that's definitely a good question. So there's a couple of different factors you're going to want to consider. One of them would be which services are going to bring the most value if they get translated into a service catalog platform like this. So things like your highest volume types of services that get requested, and anything where automation that comes by virtue of deployment in a service catalog platform will start compounding the efficiencies gained and the value that you realize from that. So I would typically say your highest volume requests or those services that are going to benefit most from this type of automation. All right, so what integrations would you recommend at the onset of the service catalog launch? Obviously, that's going to depend on the various external systems that your company uses, but one that I would typically recommend you consider would be one of those help desk ticketing systems that I mentioned. So if your business already uses an external ticketing system like that, an ITSM tool, it definitely makes sense to consider integrating with that. Again, you can deploy it into the catalog and automate that integration with that ticketing system in a way that your end users or customers will be obscured from that whole process. They just will have a single interface for requesting the services that they need and being able to track them all the way through to completion. And that way they have a single place to follow their requests as they progress through. And the work that takes place on the back end, on the fulfillment side, is really kind of invisible or seamless for them. All right, it looks like we have time for maybe one more question. How long should we allow for this type of pre-implementation prep? That's obviously going to vary from organization to organization. It'll depend on, of course, how big your company is. But I would tend to say maybe something measured in weeks and not months. You definitely want to avoid getting yourself into what we call analysis paralysis. You want to walk through the 6 steps that we talked about today thoughtfully and gather as much information as you can, but you just don't want to get bogged down in that. Again, we talk about things that are fairly high level, some tangible steps you can follow to begin collecting all the information you really need to get started. But I would probably recommend something more in the 4 to 6 weeks range if possible. You know, get all that key information together and then really get started. Don't get bogged down trying to detail out every possible thing. All right. Again, sorry for not being able to get to any of the other questions. We will definitely follow up with every question that you sent individually as quickly as we can. And I thank everyone for your time and for attending today, and have a nice day.